Коллеги, можем начинать? Мы начинаем буквально через минуту.
Good morning, dear colleagues. We'll be starting in about a minute.
Уважаемые коллеги, дорогие друзья,
Dear colleagues, dear friends, I'm very glad to open our discussion today because indeed it's coming up to a level, reaching a level of the project under the initiative of the Arctic Initiative. This is about the developing principled new approaches and formats in the Arctic region, and the fact that today we're getting on with the discussion, not just on the level of bilateral cooperation or on the level of existing arrangements that in place for a long time. We've been long intending to look at the Arctic project in terms of contributions by different authors and contributors. The other point, the ThinkArctic, it's also about creating a community, that forward-looking community with a brave look on the cooperation in the Arctic. We can say it has come to pass. It's been established today. We have a list of our new friends from China, India, with whom we started to discuss our discussion back in November of 2019. First, we talked about this under the formats of bilateral formats. Then we discussed this in during the summer of 2022, and today we are coming up to a new high level of discussion. I'm really glad that the draft report that has been sent to you, it's a draft report, so based on the results of the discussion today, of course, we'll be taking into account new ideas for cooperation, and so the updated version will be posted both in English and Russian and on the special site of the project. So in this report, which was prepared by way of setting the background for our discussion, it features the initiatives of national strategies, among other things, but it gives a sense of the extent to which BRICS member countries are interested in Arctic exploration in terms of the priorities that we may share in the Arctic region. But the main focus of the report, that for each topic, for each theme, there's a report on what's been done, what we've been able to achieve over the 2 years of our collaboration. I'm glad that we are in for a new type of discussion, new type of collaboration. So we're looking forward to your comments, questions, and your new outlooks on the Arctic cooperation, how it can be beneficial to the BRICS countries as well as to the Arctic itself. Now, according to our good tradition, I want to pass the floor to Nikolai Karchan, who is a ambassador extraordinary of the Russian Federation, but also not just a partner and a friend of our project, but is also a driving force, a person who inspired this initiative in many ways. So I hope you will not be disappointed with us, Nikolai Viktorovich. Good day, Anastasia. Thank you very much for esteemed colleagues, dear friends. First of all, I would like to note that the BRICS countries are becoming increasingly important and significant factor in the world of politics across all kinds of directions, and which gives a good example of forming a multipolar world. The Russian Federation is welcoming the inclusion of the BRICS countries into the joint work in the Arctic region in different formats, in different directions that may be of interest to the individual countries of the BRICS as well as to the BRICS as a whole. A majority of these countries have been active participants in the exploration of the Arctic or in the Antarctic. India and China have been conducting quite important research in the highland Asia regions, it's important to be aware the increasing significance and increasing role of the three poles of the world climatic agenda. So it appears to be interesting. The polar initiative, which could integrate the research of the BRICS countries uh, across the three poles, which could emerge as an important contribution on the part of the BRIC countries towards the global climate agenda in terms of advancing and promoting this agenda and interests of the BRICS member countries in the context, among others, of the Paris Agreement. With some countries of the BRICS, Russia has been successfully developing a multilateral interaction in the Arctic, including the economy, transportation, science, and inter-school, inter-university interaction and climate. We're seeing this as holding major prospects, take into account, among others, the fact that the Russian Federation is going to be the chair of the BRICS in the next year. Russia, as you will be aware, is the largest Arctic power, which accounts for, among others, for about 70% of the entire volume of economic activity in the Arctic region. We're also interested in promoting a dialogue on the topics of the indigenous peoples and nationalities of the BRICS countries. So we're prepared for appropriate exchange of opinions in the interests of advancing depoliticized approach to such topics. At St. Petersburg, there's a research institute of the Arctic and Antarctic. The director of this institute has confirmed the institute's interest in building a mutually beneficial dialogue and collaboration with all the countries of the BRICS association. The Arctic zone of the Russian Federation is also a zone of innovation and advanced economic development. We have built an unprecedented ice-resistant self-propelling platform of North Pole platform, which is currently drifting in the central part of the Arctic Ocean. We are setting up the Snezhinka snowflake station, which is a year-round, completely autonomous platform based on hydrogen energy sources for scientific and engineering cooperation, which will be located in the Yamal-Nenetsky region. Besides, the Russian Arctic is, among other things, is the world's largest preferential zone for investments. So in this regard, the Arctic region may emerge as a region of multidimensional interaction between the countries of the BRICS. Among others, as far as implementation of the most optimal forms of energy transition of the member countries of the BRICS, as well as increasing resistance or resilience of the global economy and the BRICS countries' economy under new conditions. On my part, I would like to note that we are open to contacts with representatives and organizations of the BRICS member countries as far as the Arctic agenda with regard to most various directions that these countries might be interested in. I'm hopeful that today's conference will help identify the added value of the interaction between BRICS countries with regard to the Arctic and will contribute towards forming a polar-based agenda of this organization. I thank you for your attention, and I wish you an interesting discussion. Thank you. Thank you very much, Nikolai Viktorovich. We are hoping for this too, for interesting and productive discussions. And our experience of cooperation with the colleagues that will be speaking today confirms us in this. Besides, the Institute of Arctic and Antarctica that you mentioned, its director, Alexander Makarov, is also a member of the community ThinkArctic. Last summer, at the St. Petersburg Forum, he was actually telling us about the whole number of initiatives of multipolar science and research, which includes, besides Russia, China, and India, Brazil, South Africa has more than 14 years of such research experience. Besides, so lots of content. Besides, BRICS, unlike many other platforms, BRICS has a very well-functioning Institute of Development. And there's a whole number of projects that our report mentioned and also that were mentioned in our bilateral discussions. They clearly need the impulse of multilateral approach. So we're hoping that our discussion will help to provide this type of multilateral impulse in terms of research and developing new materials and developing new technologies to do with sustainable development. So now I would like to invite to our discussion our participants from the BRICS countries. Quite recently, we had a discussion of the first steps of India as far as for formulation of concepts of its own Arctic strategy. Today, we can speak of new multilateral initiatives. I would like to give the floor to Professor of the University of Jawaharlal, Professor Surajikopalana. Professor, are you with us? Then we'll take, we'll make a quick clarification. I want to give the floor to our senior researcher of the Institute of Defense Research and Analysis, Manohar Parikara, Professor Tumar Marsinga. Professor, are you with us? I can see you are with us. If you would switch on the microphone.
Please, 1 second, we can clearly see you.
Yeah, hi.
Professor Gopalan, are you ready to present?
Yes. Thank you for asking me to join this. From Delhi, I would like to draw 3 points. Number one, I myself am not proposing any significant policy prescription for this dialogue, but as someone who is in social science research, I have seen in recent years in India, there is greatest impetus for a new kind of a development, which I found greatly, energy intensive as well and capital intensive. And I think that is one reason why over the last, since 2007, India is showing increasing, interest in Arctic, region. But my, view is that partly this is, because of the kind of development that India is now pursuing, but much of the Arctic related discussions I have noticed there is a global common concern to maintain its as a global commons. So I think it will be great for the future generations if Arctic countries can take, especially great powers like Russia, United States, and China and others to arrive at a consensus to to either to moderate or limit what has been referred to as a great acceleration of activities in the Arctic region in terms of new energy exploration or more connectivity, etc. So one, in a way, as an individual based on India, I would say that if if the Arctic, it should not get more crowded with so many countries taking part in all kinds of explorations. If the Russia and other countries can arrive at a consensus, share say scientific research and weather-related details, which are some of the concerns of say for India. This is one set of questions. Secondly, as I said, that as to why there is, although India is not closer to Arctic, this great interest and say motivation to take part in scientific as well as other kinds of exploration is maybe because of the the type of development that many countries are now following, in particularly huge energy say demand, so much of capital, in intensive approach. Once those things are changing, it may be more helpful for say humanity as a whole. And we also see that in recent years, over the last 10 years, India's approach to even Himalayan region, we also see high levels of say investment and infrastructural construction. Sometimes those developmental and infrastructural construction was carried out or implemented without adequate care appropriate for the protection of environment in that region. So therefore, sustainability is a question not only, I mean, also one of India's domestic concerns. So therefore, I hope that there will be more say policy debates within India to the idea that how Arctic region say activities now participated by so many countries can be stabilized. There can be much less competition. There can be much limited exploration. And also Arctic can be, and for this, if great powers countries can take initiative to arrive at a consensus, at least some I'm sure that such discussions and debates are going on. But only submission that I would like to make briefly is to convey this idea that among BRICS countries as well as within India, there has to be a more public discussion to what extent any kind of a new exploration can happen in Arctic and how it can be say keep it at a very limited level, so that the great acceleration of human activities will not have a much of a spillover effect into that region. I mean, I'm just to say making one or two points which is connected to both India's domestic issue and also as to why there is a greater impetus which was shown by India that needs to be discussed within India and within among these countries, so that there can be this wider awareness that this will be a global common concern. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. Actually, if I may, to address a small pointing question, you mentioned various areas for cooperation and of Indian interest. If we can make like a midterm plan for coming 3 to 5 years, would it be particularly energy or joint research, particularly to study the spillover effects of climate change, or joint projects in Arctic logistics? What would you stress as the key Indian interest for coming 3 to 5 years in the region?
Already there are many Indian research institutions are participating in Arctic scientific research. So I would say India must follow primarily on scientific research on, say, weather-related issue which affect farming communities in India. And also India must cooperate, can cooperate with great powers, including Russia, for, say, sharing data, from the other scientific research. So scientific research should be the main focus of India when it comes to Arctic, than energy, because energy exploration in Arctic can be, that's an area I would say to be given to the Arctic countries, and particularly in Russia and other Arctic, countries to. Because that area, they have more, say, not because of the scientific or capability, but other countries, say, participation in energy cooperation or exploration will make it Arctic region more vulnerable. So the idea of sustainability, if we think, I would say it is more of scientific research for the next 3 to 5 years to come.
Well, thank you. I fully share your point. As I know, last year annual Congress of Polar Studies took place in Goa, in India. So India definitely makes a very practical effort to play this role. And your idea about data exchange, actually, it fits very well to our previous discussions on the necessity for some data hub regarding climate change, climate issues. And maybe BRICS could be one of playgrounds to place that kind of data hubs, as we unfortunately see a pretty mentally unhealthy position of some Arctic Council members regarding practical cooperation on even on research and climate issues. Thank you very much. I will switch to Russian now, and I hope that you can follow the translation in Zoom. If no, please send us some note in chat. В своем выступлении профессор Гопалан упомянул в том числе...
In his presentation, Professor Gopalán mentioned, among others, the matter of relations between greater powers, the matters of law and polar research and research on the shelf. Now, I would like to ask our participant who has the widest expertise in this matter, Professor from the School of Law and of the Ocean University of China and the founder of the Center of Polar and Ocean Portal. I would like to ask him to join our discussion and to join your views, not just as far as legal matters, but also as far as the potential opportunities that the BRICS might provide for the promotion of the Arctic agenda, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation from the organizers. Sorry, excuse me, could I share my screen?
Yeah, we see you, we hear you, it's all fine.
Yeah.
We want to share the screen?
Sure, yes.
Just a second. We will extend rights for you to share the screen.
Okay. Okay. Dear colleagues, so many thanks for the invitation to take part in this very interesting event. And the BRICS rule in the Arctic governance is being given high priority, has attracted much attention around the world. So I would like demonstrate my analysis on the BRICS rule in the Arctic from the geopolitics perspectives or from the realism perspective. So my position will is made up of 3 parts. First, I will show the Russian position and the situation in the Arctic, which is special military operation. SMO. And then I will do my personal analysis about Russian concern about BRICS participation in Arctic. So at last, I will give my prediction. Russian choice in the future. First, what's the effect or impact of Russian position and the situation in Arctic due to the special military operation? So it has been realized. So forgive me my frank attitude. It has been recognized by Russian society after more than 3 centuries that Russia will not absolutely accepted by the West. So a weakening up of the most Russian laws are. That means Russia cannot go back to the normal relationship with the Arctic 7, E7. So even though the standoff between Russia and the West changes than before, than the special military operation, this should be over. So, but Russia has been a big power, a great power in the world. So this ambition directs Russia to another international mechanism. So at this time, BRICS enters into the Russian strategy viewpoint. So personally, I think the more cooperation with the BRICS, title, BRICS, then more bargaining chip or leverage wise A7. So it happens that that's a Russian attitude and tendency. What's the attitude from another side? That is BRICS countries. It happens that Russian strategy changes, modification coincides with the other BRICS countries. Besides China and India, the both countries are active in Arctic governance and had much participation. The other 2 countries, South Africa and the Brazil, also they are showing strong interest in Arctic participation. So that is to say, BRICS countries is the strength or power Russia can expect and rely on. That means these countries can maybe used to balance the overwhelming landslide position of A7. So anything that has 2 sides, one coin has 2 sides. What negative are BRICS involving Arctic governance to Russia? My question to all colleagues. Personally, I think is China. Russia's most concern is China. And Russia cannot allow China deep involvement, strong presence, and a powerful influence in Arctic. So let's skip up the reason, deep reason. Ironically, China is becoming indispensable to Russia Arctic development. Why? It's because China's powerful ability in manufacture, in the industry, and the infrastructure. That's to say, the most reliable country in this area is infrastructure and manufacture. So it's China. China can contribute much to the Arctic development and infrastructure construction along Northern Sea route. So China's role in the coming mechanism. What's the mechanism? I think maybe we can call it as the BRICS Arctic mechanism or BRICS Arctic dialogue. Will be giving high attention instead of other for states of the BRIC country. I have no mind and to hurt the dignity of the other 4 countries. Just show my analysis from the objective, affective, and factual perspective. So what is my prediction? What is Russian choice in the future? So one of the Russian policy is to introduce more countries, including BRIC countries, and even Japan, South Korea. Why? To balance Chinese, the effective or powerful presence in Russian Arctic region. But I don't think it works very well. I think the most effective way is still the strategy or strategy thinking. That's to say, Russia can manage the pace, the step, and the degree or extent of Chinese participation. On the one hand, Russia will make full use of the Chinese advantages in the manufacture and international influence. Chinese standing aside of Russia in the Arctic governance is helpful. But on the other side, Russia will control the rhythm, the pace of Chinese participation. Russia is the core country of BRIC countries, BRIC countries, especially is the most important country of BRICS Arctic mechanism proposed, if we call it as this name, this new name, BRICS Arctic mechanism. Russia has much power and full confidence to manage this new platform. So we can say we will say Russia will nurse BRICS Arctic mechanism, but it will manage its growing pace in the future, but not right now. Right now, I think Russia do not care about energy, will put much energy and resources to nurse, to help the development of BRICS Arctic mechanism. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Проект ThinkArctic в том числе и нацелен на то, чтобы мы обменивались нашими тревогами, прогнозами.
ThinkArctic project actually is aiming, among other things, at the exchange of our concerns and worries. I think you were quite precise in noting that the potential of Russia as a country that's involving BRICS into this format and maybe offering new tasks and objectives. So the role of Russia is quite great here. But as part of the visit by Russian Prime Minister Mishustin to China, the parties actually had a very vigorous discussion of the matters of the practical collaboration, because there's nothing that helps as much in terms of easing anxieties as joint project. But I'd like to ask you a question. As far as interest of Russia and China in joint projects, you mentioned several times BRICS as a platform. Let me repeat my question. In terms of the over maybe 3 or 5 years, it's a tangible period of time, but it's longer than half a year. Half a year is only good for maybe for a piece of research or for a summit. But over a period of 3 or 5 years, this kind of horizon, what should be the priority of the BRICS Arctic agenda? Any specific maybe type of research or institutional type solutions, or some specific kinds of study? Maybe we need a jointly owned BRICS icebreaker or something. What do you think?
Really, personally, I think the much areas, we have much potential for the cooperation in the Arctic or among BRIC countries. The research and Arctic governance. So due to the E7 sanction So, animation just now, it's not expected to return the normal position before the special military operation. So that's to say, Arctic governance cooperation and the research. So research should be on our agenda. And also, I think the energy should be included. Energy included. And anyway, I think too much areas cannot be count one by one. But I believe the BRIC countries, BRICS Arctic mechanism or dialogue platform will can play very active and important role in the high north. In the BRIC countries and Russia, both sides, actually we are on the one side, the same side, can benefit much from this cooperation. So in the near future or in the foreseeable future, I think our concern or worry about the Chinese, the powerful presence or participation is not reasonable. On the contrary, it will be harmful for our calming mechanism, BRICS Arctic mechanism. So the alert or the measuring pace could happen in the distant future. Right now, we need a march. We should hand in hand and make a unified efforts to promote this mechanism growing and developing stronger and stronger. It's not time. Once again, right now it's not time to control its pace and degree right now. In the distant future, it should be on the agenda. Is my opinion. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Actually, all the projects you mentioned, I guess, take more time than just 3 to 5 years. It's a very ambitious agenda, but I fully agree that we have to start with research. And I highly appreciate that both of our speakers from BRICS countries already stressed the importance of research mechanism, of research exchange, and particular mechanism to force it.
Sorry, excuse me. Sorry, could I add a word? That's maybe it's urgent or to establish the one mechanism as soon as possible. That is the BRICS Arctic mechanism. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We definitely will put this contribution into final report as a suggestion from Chinese side. А сейчас я хотела бы вовлечь в нашу дискуссию представителя Бразилии.
Now I would like to involve in a discussion a representative of Brazil. So far, Brazil comes across as a country of great potential, but in terms of details of Brazil's interest in the BRICS agenda, we had such discussions previously. So I would ask Professor Javita, Professor of Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, to share your views on the possible constructive role of BRICS in the Arctic agenda, and also maybe you could comment, if you could, the ideas about the joint research initiatives of the power projects for the world.
Thank you so much, the chair. And I am very grateful and honored to speak at this important conference on cooperation in the field of sustainable development. I would like to greet the participants, especially the ambassador at large, Korchnov, who is the biggest authority in Arctic cooperation in Russia, and also all the members of the panel which are participating, and also those present today. I will speak about Brazil going to the Arctic region, and I speak because I have a grant of coordenação de aperfeiçoamento de pessoal de nível superior Brasil CAPES, and this study is partly financed by this institution. Well, first I would like to tell you everybody what is the clue to the Brazilian Arctic policy. The clue is the experience and the participation of Brazil in Brazilian Antarctic program. Brazil has been a full member of Antarctic Treaty since 1975 and has a Southern Polar Research Program and processed knowledge about the Earth's climate, maritime resources and climate change. There is a Brazilian Antarctic program, ProAntar, which has already 40 years, and it is conducted from the base in the Antarctic called Comandante Ferraz, and it is based also on polar maritime and terrain expeditions. Brazil is a global geo-environmental actor with the largest rainforest in the world, the biggest renewable freshwater resources and aquifers, as well as with the Blue Amazon Sea Zone, which is the size of Western Europe. We live in the time of the Anthropocene climate change. And also we see the environmental interrelation and global interdependence of the two global commons, Antarctic and Arctic. These are global communicating vessels of the Earth's world ocean. And it makes the connection of the southern and northern polar research and development indispensable, unavoidable, and urgent. It is an imperative of Sustainable Development Goal 14, life underwater. Brazilian Antarctic governance is conducted through the Interministerial Commission on Sea Resources, which was created in 1974 and is headed by the Brazilian Navy to monitor the UNCLOS adoption and implementation regarding decisions with an impact on exclusively Brazilian maritime area and the Antarctic, with several programs. I will not specify all of them. Cooperation in Arctic research and development is conducted mainly in three directions. First is the Arctic Council, the Arctic treaties, and Arctic institutions. The second, and now it is very important to speak about this, is bilateral and multilateral cooperation with the founding members and observing states, and now we are coming with the BRICS. And the third, institutional cooperation through international multilateral bodies, United Nations Development Program, United Nations Environmental Program, International Maritime Organizations, and many others. Now, Arctic treaties and other associations. We know that the UNCLOS UN Convention on the Law of Seas is a prime international law authority for the region. But there is a Svalbard or Spitsbergen Treaty of 1920. And adhering to this treaty is a kind of Arctic test for country candidates to prove an ability and competence to tackle with polar problems. There are also other agreements like Arctic Search and Rescue Agreement, the Convention on Protection of the Marine Environment of the Northeast Atlantic, and other agreements, councils, international regimes, conferences and foundations, cooperative scientific research programs like International Polar Year. What about Brazil in relation to these mechanisms, legal mechanisms? Brazilian Working Group on Arctic of the Interministerial Commission on Sea Resources has taken bold decisions in 21-22, which are active and valid until now. This is the approval of joining the Svalbard Treaty, and it was recommended by the President to the Presidency of Brazil to ratify this agreement, and a plea for Arctic Council membership. The Special Working Group approved that independently of non-status of the Arctic Council observer, the non-Arctic countries may and should establish an informal cooperation with the Council and its member states in order to establish bilateral agreements. In adopting Arctic policy decision, Brazil recognized that a scenario for recent transformation in the Arctic, besides affecting climate and the level of oceans, can give rise to problems related to energy and mineral resources extraction and fishing, expansion of continental platforms, geopolitical options, and governance of shared commons with impacts on Arctic and also non-Arctic actors. Bilateral cooperation with Arctic states is important for Brazil. Let's take an example of Russia. Russia, the biggest Arctic state, stretches over 53% of the Arctic Ocean coastline. And as the Ambassador Korchinov told us, 70% of all Arctic activities are conducted by Russia. Preservation of the Arctic as an area of peace and cooperation by Russia goes hand in hand with the principles of the Brazilian foreign policy and sustainable development goals. The unique ecosystems of Arctic and Antarctic are very much interconnected. Socioeconomic development goals of the population of the Arctic region of Russia is very coherent with the Brazilian indigenous population development goals in the Amazon and the riverside living populations. And the use of the Northern Sea Route as a national transportation line of the Russian Federation in Arctic must be of utmost importance for world sea transports and global value chains. We also observe a geopolitical and economic growth of Arctic with oil, gas, and marine resources exploration. Arctic is opening to this expertise as a new frontier of natural resources extraction and nature conservation. For years to come, it will be Russia's primary Arctic industry. In this sense, the Brazilian expertise is in drilling and producing oil offshore is one of the most daring experiences of the last 20 years. Also, fishing is relevant as a food and global value chain in context of global climate crisis phenomena. Analyzing maritime issues, Russia is the only country that has the biggest fleet of icebreakers, although China is also building its open fleet. And a lot of those icebreakers are nuclear icebreakers, and a few of them are unprecedented floating nuclear power plants. About the BRICS in the Arctic region. Among BRICS countries, only Russia is an Arctic country. China and India are the Arctic observer countries since 2013. And Brazil and South Africa are non-Arctic states and do not make part of the Arctic Council or observer group. India is as an old actor as Russia. Both countries signed the Svalbard Agreement Treaty in 1920, India as a British dominion at the time. Brazil is interested in cooperation with Russia, China, and India in Arctic projects and scientific research and polar exploration. Since 2015, the BRICS countries have declared ocean and polar sciences as part of their scientific research cooperation, and it was approved by the strategy for BRICS economic partnership, which was adopted at the UFA summit in Russia in 2015. In July 2018, the first meeting of the BRICS Working Group on Ocean and Polar Science and Technology took place in Brasilia, in Brazil, and decided on research priorities, joint BRICS cruises, ocean and polar science infrastructure. Then the working group met every year since then. An expansion of maritime routes in the Arctic region as a virtual complement of the Northern Sea route to the Belt and Road Initiative of China would enhance significantly world cargo transport capabilities. Russia is already involved in projects of Chinese and Indian interest in the region, such as the gas hubs on the Arctic coast. Indian companies have invested in Arctic energy and mineral resources, and India has been receiving shipments of LNG from the Russian Arctic. The Arctic region transports natural gas to the Chinese market, either by sea or through gas pipelines going to the northeast of Chinese border. What is Brazilian scientific interest in the Arctic? It is driven by three questions. First one, how quickly will climate change in the Arctic and melting Arctic ice affect the South Atlantic? Second, what are the economic benefits of opening annual shipping on the Northern Sea routes, providing navigation between Europe and Asia? Third, how will the development of oil and gas fields on the shelf of the Arctic zone of the Russian Federation affect world markets and the climate change? These are scientific questions, but there are also political and economic interests which lie with practical measures. First, establishing a dialogue with the member states of the Arctic Council in order to join the Council in the future with observer status, as well as Arctic Economic Council. Second, monitoring climate change impacts in the Arctic and their consequences for Brazilian and South American areas, for the exploration of its resources, and for the conservation of biodiversity. And the last but not the least, excuse me, promoting research in the Arctic through bilateral cooperation and multilateral cooperation with Arctic and non-Arctic states, and inside the BRICS especially, using the Brazilian experience of cooperation in Antarctica. The Brazilian Arctic governance is conducted through multilateral diplomacy and actions in development program of the United Nations Environmental Program, United Nations Convention on Climate Change, Biodiversity Convention, Sustainable Development Goals, Paris Agreement, and others. Looking towards the north, the challenge is to rise to the level of 2F polar dimension country. Brazil decided to participate in the governance of three of the most relevant commons of the planet: Antarctic, Amazon, and now the Arctic, and thus reinforce the Brazilian global role in which the Arctic is essential. Brazil is interested to join Arctic Economic and Development Enterprises. I spoke about Arctic Economic Council, and Arctic is economically explorable region. But knowing the limitations of the situation inside the Arctic Council and Arctic Economic Council, it will be reasonable and more profitable for Brazil to join the BRICS cooperation, special cooperation for the Arctic region, which is not elaborated yet. Inside the BRICS, this is one of less explored issues. And the Arctic is economically explorable region in infrastructure, including maritime transport, communication, energy, and energy security, of course, mining, tourism, blue economy, and investment in human resources and capacity building, especially of the indigenous people. Brazil is an active participant of Arctic Circle assemblies. It has an interest to join the Arctic Offshore Regulator Forum, especially because Brazil is a very important actor in offshore extraction of oil and gas with its expertise and technology. Brazilian Arctic strategic planning is predominantly now with an emphasis on environment for the time being and in long term too. Research of the environmental and geopolitical impacts of the climate change on Russia and on global climate, such as increased frequency and duration of droughts, increase in rainfall, risk of forest fires, as in the Amazon region too. Research of thawing of permanently frozen ground in the northern region and liberation of the methane gas. Opportunities such as changes in conditions for transporting cargo in the northern seas and access to Russian continental shelf in the Arctic. Exploration of arable lands, livestock sector, northern forests. And of course, in terms of multilateral cooperation with the BRICS countries, in establishing dialogue between negotiators on the implementation of the Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Agreement, Biodiversity Convention, Sustainable Development Goals, and of course the Convention on Climate Change, bilaterally and within the BRICS. Well, there was a very interesting position on geopolitical differences between the Antarctic and Arctic. We know that Antarctic region is a zone of peaceful cooperation protected against militarization and nuclear installations by the Antarctic Treaty. Brazil is a pivot in the South Atlantic Peace and Cooperation Zone, ZOPACAS, since 1986. This is a buffer zone against foreign interventions and hegemony in the Antarctic of 24 member states, 3 of them South American, and 21 Western and South African countries. This area is vital for Brazil and includes its a special economic zone, archipelagos, which is called a Blue Amazon. We know that after a period of fruitful interaction in the Arctic, international tension came back. The region is being gradually transformed into an arena of military competition and rivalry between the NATO and Russia in the context of a new Cold War. So this is a great difference between two geopolitical regions. And that's why now cooperation in the Arctic region is more difficult and more problematic than in the Atlantic region. So the very important cooperation objective must be try to return the Arctic cooperation to its normalcy, which was very important at the time of after the end of the Cold War and during some 20 years. We have a mixed view of Arctic reality, which is relevant, and it's very important for great and middle powers. And there are some disputes. We know that the Western Arctic Council member states decided to stop cooperation with Russia, and the Russian presidency now is over, and the destiny of the Arctic Council is not certain, whether it continues without Russia or it doesn't function at all. So this is a very serious situation which must be averted by cooperation between the countries of the region, which must put the confidence and also the problems of trust between them for global needs as the climate change and try to cooperate in this region. So this must be a very important diplomatic initiative of cooperation in this region. And I think that Brazil will be very interested in participate in it. And one more thing just to add. You know that not only BRICS countries are interested to cooperate in Arctic, but those who want to be candidates to the BRICS, and one of them is Turkey. Turkey is the country which declared its interest to join the Arctic cooperation. So we see the interest not among the BRICS countries, but outside the countries which want to be candidates to this very important grouping of countries. So thank you so much for the attention.
Большое спасибо за такую объемную картину бразильского интереса.
Thank you very much for such a wide, three-dimensional picture of Arctic and Antarctic, the experience in solutions and diplomatic efforts that Brazil is involved in. You have mentioned more than once the matters related to two stories, two areas. First, the areas of high vulnerability, both Arctica, Antarctica, Amazonia, 3A, you might say, and as far as the global changes of climate, and monitoring the process of climate changing in these regions, particularly important, not just for the countries that are closely located to next to or part of these regions, or for the entire world, for the entire planet. What's your view? Maybe as far as the platform of BRICS, the directions to do with monitoring and research of regions of high vulnerability. Maybe there are other such regions that maybe other countries could suggest.
Important question about the global commons. Three important global commons we are speaking about, and they have to do with Brazil and with all the world. So I think that we should think a lot about this in three perspectives: in short-term, medium-term, and long-term perspectives. First of all, I think that inside the BRICS, what must be done, and it is very important, it's legal and institutional agreements and statements which are necessary to cooperate closer in relation to those three important global commons. Because I would say that in my point of view as a researcher, I think that the questions of global environment and sustainable development goals must be reinforced in cooperation between the BRICS countries. In the statements, I speak surely about the statements. I know that there is much cooperation which goes on the sidelines of the BRICS, but in summit declarations, those questions don't have the necessary and profound statement. So it must be reinforced. I mean, in terms of bilateral agreements and multilateral statements by the 5 countries. And they must, first of all, be very keen on the question of global environment. I mean, climate change. This is the question of short-term and long-term preoccupations. But speaking about the medium term, this is the question of research. Research is necessary, but research has already proven that we have climate change coming, and we know how much it will affect us in about 20 years, 25 years, and about 75 years in 2010. We'll have the level of ocean much bigger, much higher than it is. So cooperation is important, but now we have to take measures to know how to deal with the climate change. And what is important and should not be forgotten, and it is medium-term question, and it's also long-term, the question of development, because development, this is sustainable development of the great region by all the countries. Without development, we would not be able to stop the climate change. Sustainable development was created exactly to try to affect or to stop or to mitigate, as they say, the climate change. So mitigation depends on development, depends on how, in what conditions, transport and mineral resources extraction will be done in terms of sustainable development. For example, there is now a dispute in Brazil over the positioning of an oil extraction rig, which is situated about 100 kilometers outside the Amazon River outlet to the ocean. And there is a very strong opposition to put it there in this place. Yes, 100 kilometers seems too much, but there is a concern that it will be a very strong, very strong hurt of the environment. So a small example, but it will show us how careful we should be in relations to the development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I fully share your point on the importance of the balance between development and mitigation. We can't split these two issues. And on the playground of ThinkArctic project, we regularly raise the concern of Russia, of Brazil, of China, of many countries that feel this development impetus, that we can't just turn most of fragile regions into especially protected zones, frozening there all the development, energy development, because it's not only the issue, as you said, about like blue economics or energy development, it's the issue of energy security, food security for hundreds of millions of people. And we can just postpone the solution for these questions for a couple of decades while we learn how to tackle climate change better. Большое спасибо. Сейчас я, во-первых, я не могу не отметить, что для нас
Thank you very much. I can't help but note that Nikolai Viktorovich is still with us. So I'm hopeful that a whole number of suggestions by our colleagues in terms of promotion of bilateral and multilateral agreements will excite your interest. It's been a very good dialogue. What we are talking about now, the China's global interests, India's interests are becoming increasingly global. The esteemed professor mentioned that Brazil, described Brazil as a country with global interests too. In the Arctic region, there are several players operating, among them the European Union. And three of the members of which are the three countries of the Arctic Council. Now, the decision the Arctic Council took was to encourage the trend towards a ban on the projects in the Arctic. Does it concern the BRICS country? Of course, it concerns the BRICS country. Which portion of oil or gas products, say, China is receiving, or India? So it's a matter of, is it a matter of energy security or not? Professor from Brazil said that he spoke of the prospects of food security. Are they there? Of course. As far as Brazil is concerned, in the Arctic, yes. Brazil is receiving 25% of mineral fertilizers from the Arctic region, so it's relevant to Brazil for sure. So the way the matter stands, strategically speaking, are we prepared to promote our platform, that is to say, the BRICS countries, take into account our global interests, or are we going to be separate, disparate, and would have to adapt to the rules that, let's say, are being formulated by other entities, such as European entity, for instance. So what we're talking about is, so as far as banning, we're not talking about banning any kind of economic activity. We're talking about making sure that an economic activity would be sustainable in character. If that is the case, now a professor from the Chinese university spoke in favor of forming an Arctic mechanism. It's interesting, indeed, because there's India. So as far as mechanism, as far as BRICS, we haven't heard any comments on this concerning the BRICS mechanism from Indian representatives. So I didn't quite catch whether the India would be interested in setting up such mechanism, or maybe having some changes as far as BRICS with regard to the polar activities. What we're speaking of is that the countries, if they got together, they could promote together certain ideas and priorities. So the second point is about mechanism or no mechanism. You know what? If as far as BRICS, suppose one could try to have a few projects with BRICS. For instance, interpolar, 3 poles, Arctic, Antarctic, the Himalayas. One could think of maybe, let's say, project of digitalization. Let's say digitalization on the impact of these 3 poles on the climatic agenda. Next year, BRICS, Russia will be the chair. Next time, after that, I think it will be India. So BRICS, when we get together under COP 2030, BRICS could also come out based on its platform and say, yes, we are BRICS countries. We're also concerned. We're conducting a certain research, and now the BRICS could say, we would like to see the energy transition to be under comfortable conditions as far as our countries are concerned, as far as our population and economies. So research, could there be research, joint research? Of course. One could maybe think of organizing joint marine expeditions by the member countries of the BRICS, or maybe a research project jointly. Let's say maybe South Africa might find it difficult to send their representative, but we could do it maybe remotely. Say by proxy, maybe somebody from India or China could maybe represent interests of South Africa. I would suggest looking at the need for BRICS, maybe being aware of this kind of responsibility, because it could be maybe part of the BRICS responsibility to formulate more harmonious development of international relations. And as for the Arctic Council, it's hard to say how it will fare and proceed, because the contradictions there are still continue. But the most important point is the level of trust. Now we have Russian scientists, and I find it hard to convince Russian scientists to cooperate with American scientists now, because American scientists overnight said they discontinued all the contacts. So how is it possible to have a partnership now? So now we have increasing level of internal domestic scientific collaboration in order to replace those kinds of research and studies that were ceased and were discontinued. So we understand that as far as the BRICS, the cooperation should be sustainable, and of course there should be like-minded parties, but not just like-minded parties for the moment, but in terms of long-term strategic interests. If we have such strategic interests, then we can look at platforms, maybe, be it BRICS or Shanghai Cooperation Agreement. Because given the weakening of the Arctic Council, other formats are emerging with important roles and maybe capable of or called upon making new contributions. I understand we've just sat down today here for the first time. We have different kinds of experts, maybe with different levels, perhaps, of knowledge or awareness of the Arctic issues. But as far as BRICS, I think we need to pursue this kind of dialogue within BRICS and to continue with this, to try and to define the profile of BRICS as an independent entity of the countries that have agenda, they have something to say on this matter. So in terms of strengthening this effect of multiplication, maybe looking for synergy as far as Arctic, Antarctic, the Himalayas, through maybe joint research in matters of energy security, transportation security, shipbuilding, exchange of technologies, joint research and capital. So we need to involve, I think, our companies into this dialogue, to engage, because for instance, the case of certain unease as far as settlements in our different national currencies, how we can optimize those matters in order to be able to jointly build and develop new activities, even in terms of currency settlements. And we need to be aware that marine security will be of increasing importance. Marine resources, we have different opinions as far as maybe extraction of oil from the seabed. Now, for instance, Brazil says it's interested in shipbuilding, in shipping. India is interested in shipping. Now we have new companies, and but then there'll be this initiative by a major shipping company against resisting Arctic cargo transportation, Arctic shipping. So there's some pressure is brought to bear to resist Arctic transportation routes. So we don't understand all the motives behind such initiatives, but we cannot just let the Arctic lie, because it's a matter of Russia's strategic survival, the economic potential there. But there's also strategic importance to China, to India, to Brazil, as was shown in the case of agricultural market. And I'm quite confident we should be able to find common approaches with South Africa too, in this regard. As far as statements, agreements, and treaties, that's something secondary. I think first we should start working specifically as far as specific projects, and then this kind of work will be followed by memorandums and statements. All right, we failed to make our life easier. If anything, that we have more challenges, more things to think about, but that's how we like it. Now I'd like to turn to our good friends from China, who have taken part in our discussions more than once already, who have quite a representative, who have a number of representatives from the Harbin Engineering University. First, I'd like to give the floor to Professor Zhao Jiamin, Director of the Research Center of the Arctic Economy and Professor of the Harbin Engineering University. Now, many speakers have spoken today of specific projects, economic development. What's your view on the BRICS potential as a platform for development, among others, in terms of the development of the blue economy? Good day, colleagues. Thank you for your invitation. I have some issues with my camera. So I have video here. I think, particularly from the standpoint of our university, we feel that we as BRICS, it's quite important at this point to enhance and increase scientific, technical, and educational ties and connections, because both Arctic and the Antarctic and in the Himalayas, as was mentioned by the previous speakers, those are particularly vulnerable environments.
And
as the heads of our states noted, it's really important to achieve sustainable development there. So achieving those goals of sustainable development while developing the Arctic region. So it's necessary to ensure that it's innovative and there's all the technical capabilities. There are different aspects, economic and political aspects. But in terms of engineering support and technical support, our goals will be quite difficult, hard to achieve, particularly under the current in the current situations. I believe that in the current situations, both Russia and China have much they can do in this regard in terms of scientific research and in terms of industrial production. So it's possible to strengthen our positions and to supplement our strategic goals and to achieve our strategic goals, and ultimately ensuring a sustainable development and environment friendly. So the blue economy for the Arctic regions also, and with Russian universities such as SAFU and St. Petersburg State Marine Technical University, and also the Moscow Physical and Technical University. We have many projects specifically for scientific and technical support and cooperation as far as the Arctic technology. I think this particular direction is should be the immediate stage in terms of achieving the objectives of sustainable economy. This is particularly relevant, so I would like to note these points as particularly important. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now we'll ask your colleagues, Vasily Yerokhin, the researcher at the Center for the Economy of the Arctic, to comment to this discussion, presenting your vision of which projects we could start with in terms of the Arctic agenda of the BRICS. Yes, esteemed colleagues, good day. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be present here today and to share my view. Maybe I'll outline briefly, because Professor Gaut, I think, conceptually has outlined our view as a university, as a research center. Of course, because of the specific character, what we do, as Professor Gaut mentioned, we're pursuing joint projects with the Russian universities, with the Russian research centers. It's fairly narrow set of topics. Being an engineering university, we're mostly focusing on technical type of topics such as maritime engineering, whereas underwater machines, and also the economic aspects of all such joint technical projects. To my great regret, we have so far very limited experience in terms of cooperation from other BRICS countries outside of Russia. On our part, we are ready to take part in joint projects. We are prepared to share our experience, our expertise in those areas where we are professionals. Because our university today is a leading school of China as far as maritime engineering, shipbuilding. But we are aware that the BRICS countries enjoy different levels of expertise as far as Arctic research specifically. So it seems to me that to formulate working projects, working consortiums, we need to search for topics and themes in which all the countries would be interested to looking for those points of contact, points of commonality, such as maybe issues of climate, energy, food security, which concern all the countries, which that are relevant to all the countries. On our part, we are ready to contribute our technical expertise to such initiatives. Thank you very much. I'm extremely pleased that our first expanded dialogue on the matter of the BRICS agenda we are conducting it with within the expert community, within community of scientists. Professor Zhivit made a good start with the 3 key points from Brazil. What I liked, all 3 points were of really strategic character. So the answer can only be provided over a period of maybe 20, 30 years. It's really important when we talk about launching really major large-scale initiatives. I tried, and this matter was raised by Nikolai Viktorovich, the view of our Indian colleagues on the proposals we've heard already, on the topics that our discussion today. I would like to invite to the microphone Mr. Uttamakumara Sinha, the senior researcher of the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis. Mr. Sinha, you are with us. You are with us.
Please, the mic is yours, finally. By now, we have lots of ideas to discuss, so please
yes,
try to
thank
make a
you.
mix of
Thank
your
you.
vision and some comments and flashbacks to the previous
Thank
discussion.
you. Thank you very much. Greetings from India. You know, a lot of water has flowed, or shall we say, a lot of ice has cracked in the last 1.5 hours. So I will attempt to add some thoughts to the discussion, a very interesting discussion that has unfolded. Let me just quickly say that first, India is a very active observer in the Arctic region, and the only emerging economy apart from China to have a permanent research station in the Arctic since 2008. India's effort, I think, in the Arctic is to explore multiple pathways. For example, and this is something which is unfolding, and it is interesting to note that in the situation of flux that has emerged with the Arctic Council under suspension, I think it's important to bring in an Asian perspective to the region and learn from each other. I think India can take a lead here and bring in the Asian observers, China, Japan, South Korea, and Singapore, and try to make the governing structures in the Arctic region far more inclusive and equitable. And I think that should be an approach that the Asian countries should take when it comes to the Arctic region and setting up new governance structures and new regimes, because it seems that the Arctic Council might not pick up the sort of energy it had in the earlier format with these new changes, new political dynamics that has emerged. So there's a good space here to bring in a sort of a new institutional mechanism, new regimes in the Arctic region with Asian participation. I think India and China together, though despite the difficult and challenging bilateral relationship, they work quite well in multilateral mechanisms like BRICS, like the SCO, like G20, WTO, And even in the Russia-India-China trilateral that exists, I think there is a greater degree of traction, and therefore the Arctic can become an important issue to debate and discuss in these forums as well. Which brings me to the fact that India is currently the G20 president, and the whole theme of Vasudeva Kutumbakam, Sanskrit word, which means one earth, one family, one future, I think resonates very strongly with the Arctic, given its sort of interconnectedness with the rest of the world. And I think this emphasis on the revival of scientific exchanges in the Arctic as a global good, I think India is trying to pick up this in its presidency and trying to bring forth the value of interconnectedness in this world. Because I think, I mean, no region can be isolated or excluded anymore. And we are in several sense interconnected. And that interconnectedness is an important element to give Arctic the necessary attention it requires. Remember, 6 of the 8 Arctic Council members and 11 of the 13 observers are represented in the G20. So I think G20 becomes a sort of an important forum in providing necessary legitimacy and credibility and a sort of an effort to revive and resume the engagement in the Arctic, which has been disrupted of late. The last thing I think India would want is to for the Arctic to become a hostess to this big power rivalry that we seem to be witnessing. And I think India has a certain credential and a certain heft to play a certain stabilizing role in the region. And I think that is what this multiple pathways suggests, that a strong bilateral relationship with Russia, but not at the cost of the bilateral relationship with the Nordic countries or with America, can set a sort of a stabilizing and an important role for India in the region. The theme of sustainable development, which the discussion brings forth, I think is not just wishful thinking. It is nothing less than a global strategy for survival. And the Brazilian presenter made a very important statement, I think, to say that development is critical when you deal with climate change issues. And I think this is an element that can bind together the BRICS countries. That development is the key, inclusive, sustained growth is the key when we look at climate challenges. And when it comes to the Arctics, BRICS, except for South Africa, I think they all have different Arctic identities, different status in the Arctic governance. And all these countries are at different stages of their engagement with the Arctic region. So I think in the BRICS forum itself, Brazil can learn as much from India as India and Brazil can learn from China. And together, all the three can learn, of course, from Russia, which is the largest country, territorially speaking, in the Arctic region. So there is the Arctic Connect in the BRICS. We are all experienced in the Antarctica in terms of climate research, in terms of setting up our scientific, houses there in the Antarctica. So there's a lot of Arctic Connect in the BRICS forum, which needs to be pushed up the ladder. I think BRICS needs to think about it institutionally. India, Brazil, and China could learn from the Arctic Council itself in the last 25 to 26 years, how the Arctic Council has functioned, especially in terms of dialogues and processes and scientific engagement. Remember, Brazil has a very vulnerable ecosystem in terms of the Amazon forest. India has the vulnerable Himalayas in terms of the melting glaciers. We have the delta, which is the second largest in the world. Brazil has deltas, which is also because very vulnerable. China is also dependent on the glaciers from the Himalayas. So I think the ecosystem connect in the BRICS itself highlights our learning and our experiences and our understanding of what is happening in the Arctic, and also in terms of understanding how institution mechanism functions, how the Arctic Council has functioned till, of course, now. It's important in the way we shape our sub-regional cooperation in our region. For example, the Amazon Cooperation Treaty. For example, our own cooperation with our South Asian countries will be important to note, I think. Lastly, I think it will be useful if we do set up a kind of a high-level political forum. I know the BRICS has a high-level political forum, but in that high-level political forum, we should have space for Arctic conversation. And I think all these countries in BRICS, South Africa included, have a strong indigenous community. We call it the tribal community in India. And here, I think we can learn a lot from the Arctic states, in particularly from Russia, because of its vast territory and the indigenous tribes, the traditional methods, which are all very important. Also, these are critically important in terms of sustainable development goals. So I think these are important ways in which the BRICS can move forward. Also, I think the BRICS can play a very important role in sending out the Arctic message across the world in terms of climate change, in terms of sustainable development, in terms of protecting the indigenous inhabitants. So all these are elements, I think, which can be very useful in sort of reworking the BRICS and bringing in and introducing strongly the Arctic Connect in it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your frame of the Arctic message. I think it fits very well and to some extent gives some extra spirit to the idea of Arctic special Arctic mechanism initiated by our Chinese colleague. One is internal and the other is of external meaning. I see that Professor Shabit, that you mentioned a couple of times, wanted to give a short feedback to your mentions, please.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate very much the notions that were said by Uttam, what's name? Singha, that's it. Thank you. Excuse me, please. I mean that that you spoke about India and its activity in the Arctic region, and you spoke about the things when the situation in the world is complicated, and there must be new and different forms of cooperation, and they will include also such institutions, not only BRICS, but also G20, which is very important because it is one of the questions that the G20 should put on its agenda. And the World Trade Organization is also must be involved in these discussions. But I think that what must not be forgotten is that there is South-South cooperation inside the Global South. And we know that the countries that make this Global South are the BRICS. Now Russia, China, India, and Africa, South Africa and Brazil, they are part of the South-South cooperation. In this cooperation, there is a mechanism which was used already for the strongest and most important approximation of the countries, which is called IBSA, India, Brazil, South Africa. And this is the mechanism which must be used to drive, to bring together the countries of the BRICS and those countries which participate in this mechanism to the question of not only Antarctic cooperation, but also Arctic cooperation. This is very important because these countries, they participate in both schemes and both mechanisms of fighting climate change. And we have this mechanism which might be used. Also, as you represent defense studies, you must know that what is important is also to find and establish confidence and trust between the countries. And the trust now is not only established in military affairs, it must be established in the affairs of food security, climate change, sustainable development. It is very important to say that we have common goals in try to mitigate the climate change, try to supply food for many countries that need this. We must know that energy is important, and in the context of the energy security, we must know that Arctic is a very important mechanism, very important source of this, and this source must be protected, must be preserved in all the issues. So thank you so much for your mention of also development, which is important for all the countries and should not be forgotten for the countries of the developing world, especially. And Arctic must be very useful, must be very important for this development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Shepard. Dr. Singha, would you like to react briefly, especially on this IBS frame?
I think very briefly, it is in some sense a coincidence that the G20 leadership from India will go to Brazil, and from Brazil will go to South Africa. So even in the G20, there is the IPSA Connect, which is shaping up. And probably it's an opportune time for India, Brazil, and South Africa together as the Global South's representative to bring in new ideas and new sort of thinking into shaping this whole approach of reforming multilateralism. And I think the Arctic Connect would become an important feature of that in terms of learning the lessons from how institutions are built, how they could possibly be destroyed, but also picking up some of the core values of the institution, of the Council itself, in terms of the emphasis on collaboration, scientific collaboration, emphasis on sustainability, emphasis on new methodology of learning and understanding the impacts of climate change. So there are many things to learn from the Arctic region and from the Arctic Council itself. Of course, also learning how politics can and divide institutions and sometimes break it completely. So that element can also be understood in a sense that then we can learn how to cooperate better and communicate better and search for a common goal, which I think in the 21st century is very clearly outlined. The goal is sustainable development, inclusive growth, and all these elements will certainly become critically important for countries like Brazil, South Africa, and India. And in the next 3 years, given the shape of things, this will become, I think, a very important feature of that. And I thank you, the Brazilian friend. And this element, I think I would like to, bring into the discussion in my institution and with policymakers here in India.
Thank you very much, Dr. Singha, and especially thank you for mentioning that for coming 3 years, at least we can keep this BRICS rock and roll in G20 and use, of course, this period to promote the agenda of development in the interest of developing states. А сейчас я хотела бы обратиться к нашему гостю из Китая, профессору.
I would like to invite our guest from China, Deputy Head of the Center for Polar Ocean Studies of Professor of the University of Tunce, Professor Pan. Are you with us?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair, and thanks very much for the invitation. I'm from Hongji University, Shanghai, China, and I am interested in polar studies, particularly in Arctic indigenous people. So my topic today is about how to enhance the people-to-people bond between China and Russia in the Arctic, maybe by natural cooperation. You know, the concept people-to-people bond seems to be well known with the introduction of China's Belt and Road Initiative. However, throughout history and across different nations, governments and social administrators universally acknowledge that getting the support of the people leads to smooth progress in all endeavors. At a basic level, people-to-people bond refers to promoting mutual understanding among people of different countries, which serves as a foundation for further cooperation. Through this cooperation, a higher level of pursuit of common human values can be achieved, eliminating conflicts and confrontations between nations and ethnic groups, ultimately realizing equitable, peaceful, prosperous, and civilized human society. As the development of people-to-people bond between the people of BRICS countries, particularly between the indigenous peoples of Russia, Arctic, and the other 4 nations, is still in its early stages. For instance, there's limited understanding among the Chinese people about the indigenous peoples of Russia, Arctic. How many indigenous communities exist in the Arctic, Russian Arctic? What's their population size? Do they maintain a nomadic lifestyle or mixture of nomadic and settled lifestyles? Do they benefit from the convenience of modern civilization? And what are their needs and aspirations? Are they interested in traveling other countries beyond the Arctic regions? Similarly, I think the indigenous peoples of Russia, Arctic, may also have limited knowledge about the Chinese people. The situation in other BRICS countries may be similar to China. So to promote a people-to-people bond between Chinese and indigenous peoples of the Arctic, Russia Arctic, the people of China and Russia can follow these 3 steps. The first step is to promote mutual understanding between the Chinese people and indigenous peoples of the Russia Arctic. You know, there are various ways to facilitate mutual understanding among people of different countries. And the most fundamental method is contact and personal exchanges. Traveling and experience and different cultures is a common means of contact. And it is important for people from both countries to travel to each other's countries. And Chinese people can visit the indigenous communities in the Russia Arctic. And likewise, the indigenous people can also visit China. These ways can only require the guidance of the travel agency and provides relative. However, there is a problem. You know, traveling only provides a relatively superficial level of understanding due to the limited travel duration. Another way is to promote cooperation is academic research by exchanging scholars and students, and thereby strengthening the study of indigenous culture, traditional knowledge, and current ways of life in the Arctic. This research findings should be promptly published and disseminated to deepen the understanding of each other's cultures, needs, and aspirations. This requires a proactive promotion from international organizations and governments, such as Arctic Education Program in South Korea, which collaborates with the University of the Arctic and invites students from the Arctic region, including those from indigenous communities to study in South Korea. This model can serve as a valuable reference for China and Russia. The second step is to facilitate economic and technological cooperation between the Chinese people and the indigenous peoples of Russia Arctic. Economic and technological exchange demonstrate the trust between the two countries' people and can further benefit both sides. Historically, the trade of animal fur from Siberia played a significant role in the interactions with the outside world. The current collaborative efforts between China and Russia in developing oil, gas, and mineral resources in the Arctic region have gained widespread recognition. Additionally, as mentioned earlier, tourism activities are also economically important interactions between the indigenous people of the Arctic and the Chinese people. In future, the people of China and Russia can also promote the development and utilization of the abundant biological resources in the Arctic region. Due to its unique geographical environment and its distance from the centers of industrial civilization, the Arctic region is less affected by the industrial pollution. The rich biological resources that grow in the land have a special value for human health, and as they can treat certain serious disease and enhance human bodily functions. The indigenous people of the Arctic have accumulated a wealth of traditional knowledge in utilizing Arctic biological resources. And the traditional Chinese medicine also exemplifies the use of such resources. If the traditional knowledge of tactics of utilizing biological resources from the indigenous people of the Russia Arctic and the traditional Chinese medicine can be combined to develop the biological resources of Arctic region, it would greatly benefit from health and create substantial economic income from for the indigenous peoples of Russia. And so it is recommended that local governments of China and Russia actively promote one or two brand cooperation projects for the development of biological resources involving the Arctic indigenous people. So the third step involves promoting deep communication and cooperation between Chinese ethnic minorities and indigenous people of Russia Arctic based on the ancestral relationship between Envik people in Russia and in Chinese in China. We are aware that Envik people are a cross-border people. Efforts can be made to promote cultural exchange between these two ethnic groups, particularly in the field of reindeer husbandry. Thank you. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much. We have a brief question, please, Professor Shabik.
Please, would you try to tell us about the position of the permanent representatives of the indigenous people as to the situation in the Arctic Council, please?
I'm sorry. The permanent participants in the Arctic Council are the Arctic indigenous people organization in the Arctic Council. Okay, how? I'm sorry.
What do they think about the situation when the Arctic Council is not functioning now? What do they say about this? How is the position of the permanent representatives of the indigenous people?
Yes, I read some of materials, research materials. They are very certain about the situation of the Arctic Council. But I think the PPA's permanent participants, I think they don't want to the Arctic Council does not work, and because the platform, the Arctic Council platform is very important for the PPAs to voice their demand, their wants, their yeah, okay.
Thank you very much, Professor Pan, and thank you for raising this very important issue. In our report, we have some paragraphs dedicated to indigenous people and this frame of BRICS Arctic agenda to Arctic tourism in many dimensions, not only like recreation tourism, but also research tourism and people-to-people tourism. And we will definitely stress these issues more after this discussion. Thank you for your contribution. А сейчас я хотела бы передать слово нашему последнему, the last but not the least speaker из Китая, профессору, доценту Ван Дай.
Last but not least speaker, professor from China of transportation engineering. Now we've heard a lot of comments today about sea routes and the shipping. This is one of the main areas of global connectivity of the Arctic and other regions. Professor Van had been with us throughout the discussion. Professor Van, are you with us now? We're happy to see you. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
We can hear you perfectly and see you.
Can I share the screen?
Yeah. Just a second. We'll fix it. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for inviting. Thank you for this meaningful conference organizer. Today, my topic is about how to build a green Arctic shipping corridor. As we all know, the Arctic shipping route via Northern Sea route between Europe and Asia could decrease shipping time and shipping distance, and abundant oil and gas resources in the Arctic has increased its transport potential for energy. But the Arctic shipping will emit some air pollutant and greenhouse gases, especially black carbon. So the Arctic shipping will cause some air pollutant in the Arctic and will accelerate the ice melting and global warming. Therefore, we should use the Arctic shipping routes on a green and sustainable basis. In order to build a green Arctic shipping corridor, we should establish some standard for Arctic shipping, such as fuels, vessels, and ports. As for the fuels, considering the emission of different fuels, we could replace traditional fuel oil with no carbon or zero carbon fuels. Taking into account the accessibility of fuel in the Arctic, I think maybe LNG is suitable for the short to middle term, and hydrogen is suitable for the long term. As for the vessels, we could set up some benchmark for shipping, such as the shipping age, ice breaking level, energy efficiency index, carbon intensity, etc. And as for the ports, we could stipulate the installation of shoreside electricity system and the bunkering facilities of LNG or other green energy. The Arctic shipping corridor will go through different countries, including Arctic states and near Arctic states. So the cooperation between different countries is very important. In this respect, we could coordinate the relationship between different countries according to the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. On the other hand, the Arctic shipping supply chain consists of various stakeholders, including ports, shipping companies, cargo owners, fuel producers, customers, local authorities, etc. So collaboration between these parties are also very important. We could establish some platform to provide cooperation and collaboration opportunities for different parties. In this respect, we could refer some experiences of other green shipping corridor, such as the Northern European and the Baltic Green Shipping Corridor, which is initiated by major ports in the Northern European and the Baltic Sea and the McKinney Muller Center for Zero Carbon Shipping. In current situation, the main governance institution of international shipping is IMO. And the IMO has taken some management measures to reduce carbon emission in the shipping, such as WE&IA, EEXI, SEMP, and CII. In addition to these international shipping rules, the vessels shipping in the Arctic should also obey the Polar Code, but Polar Code mainly covers the range of ship design, operation, and training. It lacks detailed decarbonization shipping rules for Arctic. So we could suggest IMO to take some regulatory policies, such as setting up emission control area in the Arctic, having carbon tax on Arctic shipping, or establishing emission trade system on the shipping area. On the other hand, I think some relative government could take some supportive policies in order to increase the feasibility of green shipping, such as providing subsidies for green fuels and shoreside electricity. In summary, the green shipping corridor is very important for sustainable development of Arctic, and the cooperation and the collaboration between different countries and the different parties is very important to the success of the Green Arctic Shipping Door. That's all for my report. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for such an insightful, very close to the point presentation. If we maybe would ask you to send us the full presentation to share it at our ThinkArctic webpage among the community of Arctic experts and those who are interested in the region and are not experts yet. Thank you very much. I hope that many of suggestions that you raised in your presentation could be put into practice. And unfortunately, we're like 5 to 7 minutes out of time, but I would kindly ask our participants to give us an opportunity for our students to raise one question. We don't have too much time for more, but you were brave. You spent all 2 hours with us, and I know that you put lots of efforts to make this event happen. Please, one question. Okay, and please introduce yourself, and if possible, the expert you address your question to.
Thank you very much. My name is Maxim Mayorov, faculty of World Economy and International Affairs. I'd like to thank you for participation of you all. And I'm not sure, but maybe I can address my question to some of our Chinese colleagues. So the question is, how would Chinese intentions to increase the number of vessels in its icebreaker fleet can influence the balance between the BRICS countries in terms of Northern Sea route? Thank you.
Professor Go, could you comment on?
Thank you. Good and practical question. Icebreaker building, I think the brochure has the outstanding advantages and possessing the most advanced technology across the world. So it is our the research area of much potential. So, and due to our good strategic cooperation, so in the near future, I think the ocean shipping through the Northern Sea Road, our Chinese cargo, I think will depend heavily on the help from the Russian icebreakers. So, and but approximately, I think in the both countries can explore the icebreaking technology and ship icebreaker building in the distant future, and with the global warming and the acceleration of global warming in the Arctic Ocean. So I don't think the icebreaker. I don't think in the distant future our world will need much more icebreakers. So icebreaker is necessary for the for the shipping along the Northern Sea route in the near future, especially for the year-round transportation in the Arctic Ocean. So anyway, I don't think the ice-breaking building is very, very urgent, very, very urgent in the near future for China. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Большое спасибо. Мы потихоньку приближаемся к завершению нашей дискуссии.
Thank you very much. By and by, we're coming to an end of our discussion. Before I'm giving the floor to Grigory Milicha, Deputy Head of the Roscongress Foundation, without whom this discussion would not be possible. I want to thank our participants. I want to share a fairly gloomy conclusion. 2 hours is much too short, much too little to discuss the agenda of BRICS in the Arctic. Today, we've had representatives in discussion of 8 universities and research centers, and our friends from South Africa, from South African Republic, unfortunately were unable to get connected, but they will provide their feedback in writing. So now we have a strong 10. So we could start thinking about setting up a consortium of Arctic research based on BRICS. Maybe to start with, just to make systematic the whole range of ideas and proposals that our esteemed guests have spoken of today, because 2 hours have proved to be far too little, not enough. Now, good day, dear colleagues. I'm glad to welcome you, to greet you all at our next stage of our project, Think Global, Arctic Think Global. Definitely, this project has become one of the high points of Russia's chairmanship in the Arctic Council. We're meeting up, we've met several times, we're meeting up once again We have lots of experts, lots of countries represented. So we started off with bilateral dialogues, then we moved to multilateral discussions. The Arctic Council is developing in a strange way, to be frank, but one way or another, regardless, under Russia's chairmanship in the Arctic Council, new discussion for platforms are emerging and new formats are emerging. Very soon, Russia will assume chairmanship of BRICS, and there's no doubt that the new formats will be emerging under this chairmanship too. And the format that we've been discussing today maybe is likely to become one of the high points of our country's chairmanship in the BRICS as well. There's no doubt that we, as a communicating platform, as organizers of such global events, will be glad and will be honored to support the initiatives that have been vocalized today in our discussion. And of course, the message of the Ambassador Extraordinary, Mr. Korchinov, about the need to set up joint research projects based on the three poles, the Arctic, Antarctic, and the Himalayas. That's a very good proposal. So if there's support for setting up consortium that Anastasia mentioned, then we'll be ready to support such research too. A green corridor of shipping, that's definitely is a tool that could help emphasize the expediency of joint research in order to determine the efficiency, effectiveness of the large-scale changes in terms of energy transitions that we spoke of today as well. In any case, we'll be glad and we'll be honored to greet you in this discussion platform. We suggest we continue our exchange of opinions offline, so feel free to send your suggestions, your proposals in terms of conducting joint research. And of course, we're looking forward to seeing you at our key events in Russia, such as St. Petersburg Economic Forum, which will be taking place in a month's time from now, the Eastern Economic Forum in September. We'll be also glad to see such wonderful experts. So we'll be looking forward to seeing you next year under Russia's chairmanship of BRICS. Thank you very much.
Thank you to all participants. Hope all our plans can come true pretty soon. Thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you. See you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.